He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're a burden, get out of my house." Not Merry Christmas, not thank you for everything. Just that. In front of everyone, with a glass of wine in his hand, and pride swelling in his chest. And do you know what hurt most? It wasn't the words, it was the way no one flinched. Welcome back to Betrayal HQ, the place where silence breaks, truth speaks, and dignity takes the lead. If you've ever been pushed aside by the very people you protected, if your love was met with cold eyes and quiet dismissal, then this story is for you. Because this time, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't raise my voice. I just opened an envelope and made them remember who they were dealing with. Before that night, I didn't ask for much. I wasn't chasing praise or trying to prove anything. I just showed up. In small, invisible ways. That's who I was. I lived in the same house I grew up in, on a quiet corner of a street where mailboxes leaned and kids stopped riding bikes around too. The kind of place where winters came early and springs took their time. I woke up before sunrise most days, not because I had to, but because I knew Mom would be awake too. She'd sit in the same chair near the window, wrapped in that old blue shawl, and I'd pour her coffee before she asked. Dad never noticed. He barely said good morning. I fixed things around the house, paid off their overdue bills quietly, cooked when Mom was too tired, drove her to appointments when her legs started failing. And when they asked why I hadn't moved out yet, I said I was saving. But the truth is, I stayed because I thought that's what love looked like. Quiet, steady, thankless. I didn't need a parade. I just thought one day, maybe they'd see me, not as the one who never got far in life, but as the one who never left when things fell apart. Maybe the people closest to you don't explode. They erode you one forgotten thank you at a time. I remember each of their faces that night, not just how they looked, but how they made me feel. How the silence between their words said more than any toast or blessing ever could. My older brother Paul sat at the far end, all sharp suits and louder stories. The kind of man who never helped carry a single bag, but always arrived with his arms wide. And even though we shared blood, it always felt like I was his shadow. Like I was just something he outgrew. We hadn't spoken deeply in years. Not since the time he told me, half joking, "You still live at home, you know it's okay to let go." And I remember laughing, pretending it didn't sting. But it did. His wife Dame was there too. Polite in that sugary way some women use like perfume. Sweet enough to make others comfortable, but never enough to cover the smell of disdain. And I still remember the look she gave me when I brought out the casserole I'd spent hours preparing. Tight smile, slow, like a teacher grading a student who tried a little too hard. Then there was Lisa, my younger sister, always somewhere between distant and distracted. The type who sent gifts through apps but never called, who would text thinking of you without actually thinking, and who once told me years ago that I had too much emotion for a man, that maybe if I acted more like Dad, he'd respect me more, and I'd be lying if I said I ever forgot that. My mother, soft-spoken and fading around the edges, sat next to me that night like she always did, eyes heavy with quiet knowing. She never defended me out loud, but I could tell in the way she passed me the bread first, that she knew what I carried. And then of course there was my father. The voice at the head of the table, always commanding, always unbothered. The man whose approval I spent my whole adult life trying to earn without realizing he'd already decided I was beneath him. He used to call me sensitive like it was a flaw. Tell me I think too much, feel too much. And that night, when he cleared his throat and said those words, "You're a burden, get out of my house," he didn't flinch, didn't look ashamed, didn't care that the table went silent. What shocked me wasn't that he said it. It was that no one stopped him, no one gasped, no one even looked uncomfortable. And that's when I knew this wasn't just about one cruel sentence. It was about years of me being invisible in plain sight. And as I sat there with the heat rising behind my ears and my hands still on my lap, I didn't see a family. I saw a lineup of people who only loved me when I was useful. And that's when I decided I wouldn't be silent anymore. Which brings us to that moment, the one no one saw coming. When I finally stood up from that table. It's funny how the things that matter most to you never need to be announced. They just live quietly inside you, shaping every decision, every silence you swallow. And for me it was never about money, or proving I was better than anyone else. It was about something far more fragile, the kind that isn't loud or dramatic, but steady and earned over time. The kind I used to hope I'd one day see in my father's eyes. The kind I wanted my mother to feel when she leaned on me instead of him. The kind I imagined might trickle down into how my brother introduced me to his friend, or how my nieces might grow up, remembering me not as the uncle who stayed behind, but as the one who always showed up. What mattered most wasn't glory. It was place, a rightful place at the table I helped keep steady. And I think deep down I held on to this quiet dream, that maybe one Christmas my father would raise his glass and say, "This one's for you, son, for all the things you did that no one saw." And I would have said nothing, just smiled. Maybe nodded, but I would have remembered that moment for the rest of my life. And yet, what I got instead was a sentence that broke something sacred, a wound I didn't even realize was open. Because when he called me a burden and told me to get out, it wasn't just an insult, it was a funeral for every silent hope I'd ever held. And I knew right then that I hadn't just lost respect that night. I had lost the illusion that it would ever come. And that loss, more than his words, is what made me stand up. At first it was small, so small I almost convinced myself it was nothing. Like how Dana stopped asking me to bring anything to family dinners, claiming she didn't want me to stress, though I'd always been the first to offer help. Or how Paul forgot my birthday again, but posted a throwback photo of him and Dad from some fishing trip I was never invited to. Caption, "Real ones only." Like a subtle erasure dressed as nostalgia. Lisa used to call once a month, but then her calls turned to texts, then to silence, and when I finally reached out she said, "Life's just busy," with a period at the end like a closed door. I noticed other things too. The way my name was left off a shared family calendar for Mom's appointments, even though I was the one who drove her to every single one. Or the way they started talking about finances in hushed tones. When I entered the room, once I spotted an envelope addressed to Paul from the family lawyer. But when I asked about it, Dad changed the subject so fast it felt rehearsed. And then there were the glances, the ones they exchanged when I spoke up. Like I was stepping out of line by simply existing too fully. And while no one said it outright, I began to feel something shifting under my feet. Like the room was being rearranged without me. Like I was slowly being written out of a script I didn't know was ending. And still I stayed quiet, still hoping it was just my imagination. But somewhere deep down I knew the distance wasn't random. It was being measured. Sometimes I think back to the way things were before the distance, before the words no one could unsay, and I wonder if any of it was ever real, or if I was just the only one who believed in it. I remember being 16, the first time Dad got sick, and how I sat outside his hospital room for 12 straight hours, without eating just in case he needed anything, while Paul was out with friends and Lisa was posting inspirational quotes online. When we finally brought him home, I was the one who helped him walk to the bathroom, held his weight when his legs shook. And I never mentioned it again, because I thought that's what sons do. I remember Mom's bad fall a few winters ago. How I came home from work, found her on the kitchen floor, her voice barely a whisper, and how I stayed up with her for 3 nights after, making sure she had soup, medicine, warmth, even as the others promised they'd swing by soon. But didn't. I remember when Lisa's marriage was falling apart, and she called me at 2 a.m. sobbing. I stayed on the phone until the sun came up, talking her through every fear, every plan, never once telling her I had to be up for work at 6. I remember Paul in debt after a failed investment, knocking on my door with fake confidence, and I handed him a check without hesitation, money I'd saved for my own play, gone with one signature and a forced smile from him that never made it to his eyes. I think about the Christmas when I bought everyone gifts with the little I had, and no one asked how I could afford it. They just assumed I had nothing better to spend it on. Back then I didn't keep score. I didn't count favors or expect anything in return. I just thought that loyalty meant something, that love was a currency that never lost its value. But now, looking back from where I stand, I realize that what I called love might have just been endurance dressed up in hope. It didn't come as a storm, no lightning, no slammed doors, just a moment so quiet it echoed louder than any argument could have. It was Thanksgiving a few weeks before Christmas, and I'd arrived early like I always did, arms full of groceries, sleeves rolled up, ready to cook beside Mom like we used to. But when I stepped into the kitchen, Dana was already there in one of those expensive aprons that never touched grease, giving orders like it was her house. She looked at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and said, "Oh, we've got it covered this year, but you can relax in the den." And it was the way she said relax, like I was an elderly guest, like I was someone they tolerated out of duty. I stood there, awkwardly holding a bag of potatoes, my mother watching but not speaking, and I wanted to ask her why she didn't say anything, why she didn't tell Dana that Thanksgiving was our thing. But she just went back to stirring whatever was already on the stove. I sat in the den alone, listening to laughter and movement from the kitchen, and when I finally walked in just to offer help again, Paul turned to me and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Don't worry about it, man. You're always so serious around the holidays." The room chuckled, lightly, politely. I laughed. Because that's what you do when the jab is wrapped in a joke. When the wound is handed to you with a smile. And that day I stayed for dinner, ate quietly, left early and cried in my car in the parking lot of a gas station I used to stop at after football practice. When life felt simpler, because I realized then I was no longer family. I was furniture, familiar, functional, and always pushed to the side when it mattered most. I sat in my truck, keys still in the ignition, hands on the wheel like I was about to go somewhere. But I didn't. The engine stayed on, the night pressing in around me like it wanted me to fold into it. And I just sat there half numb, half awake, with a lump in my throat that wouldn't go down and a question playing on repeat. How the hell did we get here? How did the same people I bled for become strangers in rooms we built together? When did kindness start feeling like weakness? When did love become a joke told behind my back? I stared through the windshield, watching snow dust the edge of the gas pump, watching couples walk out holding pumpkin pies and flowers, heading to homes where they mattered. And for a second I wondered if I was overthinking it all. If maybe I was too sensitive, too quiet, too needy, just like Dad said. But then I remembered all the times I swallowed my needs so they could breathe easier. All the birthdays I forgot on purpose just so no one else would feel guilty. All the times I gave without asking. And it hit me. This wasn't confusion. This was clarity. They weren't blind to what I did. They just knew I wouldn't make them pay for ignoring it. And in that moment in that cold truck, in the space between shame and anger, I made a quiet promise to myself. Not vengeance, not spite, just that I would no longer shrink to make them comfortable. That if I ever walked into that house again, it wouldn't be as the forgotten. It would be as the reminder. There are things I've carried that no one at that table ever knew. And maybe that's my fault for thinking silence was the same as strength. Like how 5 years ago Paul was drowning in debt, after one of his big ideas went sideways. He came to me, not Dad, not the bank, me, eyes full of pride he hadn't swallowed yet. And I handed over $12,000 I'd saved over 6 years. Without blink, no contract, no interest, no questions, just take care of it. He never paid me back, never brought it up again, just moved on like it never happened. And I let him because I thought family meant helping without keeping score. Or Lisa when her marriage cracked in the middle of the night, and she showed up on my porch sobbing, mascara running, shoes in her hand. I made up the guest room, fed her, held her while she cried, and when her ex threatened her with court, I loaned her money for a lawyer she still thinks came from Mom's emergency stash. And there's Dana, who once called me from the hospital when Paul couldn't be reached, scared, shaky, pregnant with her first. She made me swear not to tell anyone how afraid she was. And I kept that secret like a vault, even when she later said I wasn't part of the core family, because I didn't have a wife or kids. And then there's Dad, who once came to me uncharacteristically quiet, holding a medical bill he couldn't cover, because the business wasn't doing as well as he pretended. I paid it off in full, then spent the next year listening to him brag about how he always handles things like a man. And the hardest part is I never told anyone. Not because I was trying to be noble, but because I thought loyalty meant burying the story if it helped someone else breathe easier. But now I see what burying really did. It made them forget I ever held the shovel. It was the week before Christmas, and Mom had just come home from the hospital. Minor surgery, but enough that she needed help for a few days. I took time off work, stocked the fridge, prepped meals, handled her prescription, made sure she had everything right down to her favorite wool socks, laid out by the heater. And on that Thursday morning, as I was cleaning up her breakfast tray, I saw the envelope, thick, sealed, legal-looking, addressed to Paul, sitting on the edge of the hallway table, where they usually left outgoing mail. Something about it made my stomach twist, and I don't know why I opened it. I'd never done anything like that before, but I did, and what I read hollowed me out. It was an official notice from the family lawyer, confirming the transfer of the house title into Paul's name, approved and signed off by my father, quietly, deliberately, without a word to me, even though I'd been the one staying here caring for Mom, keeping the lights on, fixing the pipes, paying the overdue taxes. No one talked about. I stood there in the hallway, hands shaking, the morning sunlight cutting across the floor like a spotlight on my humiliation. And for a second I couldn't even feel my body, just this slow burning weight pressing down on everything I ever held sacred. I wasn't just being left out. I was being erased, replaced, and rewritten in real time. Like my loyalty was disposable, like my name didn't belong on anything except the bottom of grocery receipts and medical bills. And I didn't scream. I didn't storm in and demand answers. I just folded the letter, tucked it back into the envelope, and placed it gently where I found it. Because at that moment, something in me finally snapped. Not with fire but with focus. I realized I would never win in a room where they kept changing the rules behind my back. And that if I wanted to be seen, really seen, I'd have to show them exactly what they'd been standing on all along.
I didn't confront. I didn't call a family meeting, or throw the letter in anyone's face like I wanted to. I just went still in a way that made even time feel like it was holding its breath. The next morning I poured my mother's tea like always, kissed her on the forehead, and told her I'd be out for a few hours. No questions, just a soft nod from her frail frame, wrapped in that same blue shawl. I drove to the edge of town where the law office sat, tucked between a florist and a tax office, a place I'd passed 100 times, but never thought I'd walk into. I met with a woman named Alana, calm, clear-eyed and kind in the way people are when they can smell the quiet heartbreak on you but don't ask you to explain it. And I handed her a folder I'd kept for years, thick with tax records, utility bills in my name, bank statements, photos of repairs I'd done with my own hands, even checks I'd written for Mom's care, with canceled stamps and dates no one remembered but me. She didn't say much, just nodded as she flipped through them like she already knew the story before I spoke it. And by the time I left, I didn't feel victorious, just like I'd finally washed off years of being silent, while everyone else played blind. I didn't tell anyone where I'd been, didn't drop hints or speak in riddles. I just kept showing up, same routine, same soft voice, same unbothered expression, but inside the clock had started ticking, and every smile I gave at dinner, every thank you I said while they kept pretending I didn't exist, was just me turning the page in a story they didn't know I was writing. Because sometimes the most dangerous man at the table is the one who says nothing at all. It started small, so quiet, so subtle. It didn't even register. I stopped refilling the oil tank that winter, knowing Paul's name was now on the title, and watching him wonder why the heat dipped lower. Each night while I kept my bedroom warm with a space heater I bought months prior, I canceled the auto pay on the property taxes too. Let the past due notices pile up in the mail, tucked neatly behind junk flyers. They never opened. And when Dad casually complained about the county getting greedy again, I just nodded and passed him the potatoes. I logged into the security system one I'd installed years ago, and archived every month of footage, backing it up to an external drive, organizing each expense, each signature, each trace of my existence they'd forgotten to erase. I made copies of every medical invoice I paid out of pocket, every repair I logged, every email confirmation I received while handling things they thought
magically got done. And when I opened a separate account and slowly moved what was left of my savings there, not one person noticed that I no longer chipped in for family groceries or joint gifts or last-minute favors. They assumed I was finally learning to be independent, which made me laugh on the inside, because for once they weren't entirely wrong. Just decades late, even the lawyer I'd hired to re-verify the inheritance documents said it was one of the cleanest paper trails she'd ever seen. Every dot, every date, every receipt lined up like dominoes, just waiting to fall. And while they kept smiling at me across the table, kept ignoring my quiet exits and polite declines, they didn't realize I'd already removed myself from the chessboard. What they thought was checkmate was just me walking away with the king in my pocket. Maybe I should have walked away. Maybe I should have let them have it all. The house, the pride, the twisted narrative they kept rewriting without me. Some nights I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if the silence I carried was turning me into someone I didn't recognize. Someone colder, sharp, harder than the man I used to be. I was never built for games or quiet vengeance. I was the one who stayed, the one who forgave first, who filled the gaps no one thanked me for. And now here I was, collecting proof, preparing document, moving pieces in the dark like I was the one plotting an ambush. Part of me still remembered Paul laughing as kids, when we used to race bikes down that cracked driveway, or Lisa singing off-key in the back seat during long road trips, while Mom hummed to herself in the front. Those were the moments that made me hope family could always be salvaged, patched, maybe bent, but never broken. But what do you do when you realize you've been holding on to a ghost, trying to stitch back something that never valued your thread in the first place? I started to ask myself, is winning worth it if I become the thing I swore I'd never be? And still, the part that hurt the most wasn't what they took from me. It was how easily they moved on while I carried the weight of remembering everything I gave. It was Christmas Eve, the same house, the same table, the same brittle smiles pretending nothing had ever cracked. I was sitting near the end, like always sipping quietly, letting them all play their parts when Paul stood up, wine glass in hand, tie slightly loosened, like he was about to deliver something heartfelt, and with that smug kind of cheer only he could wear. He said, "This year's been about growth, about passing the torch. Dad finally put the house in my name, and I guess that means I'm the new man of the family." Laughter followed, small, polite, unaware, but the words landed like glass in my chest, not because they surprised me but because he said them out loud, in front of everyone, like it was a trophy, like I hadn't just spent the last decade maintaining the walls they now posed in front. Dad nodded, proud and puffed, his hand resting on Paul's shoulder like he was knighting him. I looked around and not one person met my eyes. Not even Mom. They thought I'd sit there, numb, silent, small. But what Paul didn't know, what none of them knew, was that everything he just celebrated had been undone weeks ago. The lawyer's notice was already in the mail, the ownership was frozen, the title transfer, nullified, all legally reversed due to unpaid taxes and mishandled documentation. What he claimed as his crown was already crumbling beneath his feet, and as they raised their glasses, toasting a throne that never truly belonged to him, I just sat there steady, still and finally free. Because some mistakes don't need to be corrected with shouting. Sometimes you just let the floor collapse quietly under them, and wait for the sound. It happened 3 days after Christmas. No fireworks, no raised voices, just a knock at the door, sharp, a fish echoing through the same hallway where I used to hang my coat and fix Dad's broken tools. Paul opened it, still in his robe, holding a half-eaten slice of leftover pie, and there stood a woman in a charcoal gray suit, calm, direct, briefcase in hand. "Are you Paul?" she asked. He nodded, and that's when she handed him the envelope. The same kind of envelope I'd once found, and returned without a word. Only this time he was the one reading in silence, as the color drained from his face. It was a legal notice. The deed transfer had been voided, the title officially reverted, and a temporary restraining order had been placed on any financial activity tied to the property until the investigation concluded. In less than 60 seconds the house was no longer his to boast about, and every lie, every quiet maneuver, every backroom conversation he'd counted on collapsed like wet ash in his hand. I wasn't even there to see it. I was across town in a small coffee shop, with my lawyer sipping something warm as the news came through her phone. Final confirmation that everything was filed, stamped, processed. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just looked out the window at the snow falling soft and steady, thinking how poetic it was, that the house I was once told to leave was now legally, publicly and permanently mine. Not out of revenge, but out of reason, paper and proof. No shouting match, no chaos, just quiet, clean justice, folded in silence, and delivered with dignity, just the way they never saw it coming. The calls came slowly at first, missed ones from Lisa, then a string of messages from Dana, short and polite, pretending to be confused about some legal mix-up, as if what happened wasn't real but just an inconvenience they could charm their way out of. Paul didn't call at all. He sent one email, dry, clipped, no subject line, asking if we could talk about this like adults. As if we hadn't both crossed the line. Only one of us had done it with a paper trail. Dad didn't say a word, not one, but I heard from a friend that he sat on the porch that night, drink in hand, staring into nothing like he'd lost something he didn't even realize he'd been borrowing. And Mom, well, she called me that Sunday, asked how I was, and somewhere between the silence and the warmth in her voice, I knew she understood what had happened. Maybe even expected. But what struck me most was what didn't happen. There was no apology, no family meeting, no let's work this out. Just quiet, long, strange, hollow silence, as if they were waiting for the moment to pass, for me to move on like always, to make it easier on them again. But I did. This time I held my ground, not with anger, not with fire, just stillness. And that's what got them, that stillness, that refusal to explain, to shrink, to soften the truth for their comfort. Because sometimes the loudest scream is the look in their eyes, when they realize they don't get to rewrite the ending. Not this time, not anymore. I'm not the same man who sat at that table with his hands folded and his head bowed, waiting for crumbs of recognition that were never coming. That version of me, the one who overgave, who swallowed hurt with a smile, who mistook silence for strength. He's gone, and maybe that's the cost of clarity. I don't walk around with anger in my chest anymore, and I don't replay old conversations looking for what I could have said better. These days I speak when I choose, not when I'm invited. I've learned that peace doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like distance, like unopened like not needing to defend the truth to people who already chose to ignore it. I see my father now not as a mountain to climb, but as a mirror I refuse to become. I don't hate him, I just stopped letting his voice dictate mine. And Paul, Lisa, Dana, I wish them well, honest, but they don't have keys to my door anymore. Not the literal one, or the one inside me that used to bend for them, out of some old sense of duty. I'm not harder, just clearer, not colder, just lighter. I don't need their approval. I don't even need their understanding. All I ever needed was to know that I was never the burden. They were just too used to standing on shoulders. They refused to see, and now, I walk taller, not to tower over them, just to finally stand on my own. It was just a key, silver, worn, with a small crack near the edge from when I dropped it on the porch. One winter,
but I'd had it since I was 15. The same key I used to unlock the back door every evening. After school, the same one I turned when I carried groceries in for mom. When I let Paul in after a fight with dad. When I came home from jobs I hated, just to be closer to the people I loved. I kept it on a simple ring, nothing fancy, alongside a tiny flashlight and a bottle opener. That never really worked, but that key, that was my place, my proof, my anchor, and for years I held it like it meant something, like it made me something, a son, a helper, a placeholder for someone they might one day truly see. After the title was legally mine, people kept asking if I'd change the locks, reclaim the doors, start fresh, but I didn't. I kept the lock and I kept the key, and I placed it in a small wooden box on my dresser, lined with blue felt, because that key was never about the house. It was about everything I unlocked without being invited. Everything I entered without being welcome. Everything I fixed without being asked. It's a reminder of who I was before they pushed me out, and who I had to become to walk back in on my own terms. And some nights when the house is quiet and the wind taps gently at the window panes, I hold that key in my hand, not out of anger, not out of regret, but because it still fits and so do I. I thought it was done, tied off clean. The silence that followed felt final, like the end of a book that didn't need an epilogue. But last week as I was fixing the hinges on the front gate, ones Paul always said he'd get around to, I heard my phone buzz in my pocket. Unknown number, but I knew the voice the moment it spoke. Hey, it's Dana, just that, nothing more, no small talk, no reason, no apology, just a voice from the past, slipping back into the present like it had something else to say. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, the gate half hanging in my hand, the afternoon sun spilling over the yard like it always used to, and I thought to myself, maybe this story isn't finished after all. Or maybe, it never really was. Was I wrong to protect what was mine, to gather the pieces they left scattered and say no more, to choose silence over chaos, action over begging, truth over tradition? I've asked myself that more times than I can count, lying awake some nights, listening to the hum of the house I was told to leave, wondering if becoming the version of me that finally said enough meant I had to lose the parts that used to bend for love. Maybe I could have walked away, maybe I should have, but when do you stop walking and finally turn around? When do you stop making peace with people who only ever hand you war? The truth is, I didn't do it to punish them. I did it so I could live with myself, so I could finally look in the mirror and not see a man who kept letting others write his ending. So, to you watching this, ask yourself, is protecting your dignity wrong when it's the only thing they haven't already taken? Because if it is, then maybe I was wrong. But I'd do it all the same. Every quiet move, every receipt, every step I took to remind them. I was never the burden, I was the proof. They thought I'd stay quiet forever, that I'd keep carrying the weight, smiling at the table, folding myself smaller with each year just to fit into the space they left me. They thought I'd flinch, beg, disappear, but I didn't. I just waited, silent, steady, until they handed me the rope. And I didn't use it to hurt them. I used it to pull myself out, one quiet knot at a time. I didn't need anyone else to tell this story. Not my brother, not my father, not the ones who watched and said nothing. This isn't their version, it's mine. Every moment I lived, every silence I sat in, every room I walked into and didn't feel seen, every favor I gave without asking for credit. I carried that me. They don't get to narrate the parts they ignored. They don't get to soften the edges they sharpened with their silence. This is how I remember it, how I felt it, not as some grand drama, not as revenge for revenge's sake. Just a man speaking the truth out loud for the first time without asking permission. Just a voice, my voice. And that's an 5 months later, the house was quiet again, but in a different way. Not the kind of silence that comes from people pretending. Not the tension tucked into every laugh. This was the silence that follows truth. The kind you earn. The kind you build. Spring had crept in without anyone asking. Soft wind through open windows. Fresh paint drying in the hallway where the wallpaper used to peel. I replaced the broken fence boards one morning and didn't even think about who might have once promised to fix them. The dining room still held the same table, but I'd sanded it down, restained it. Not to erase the past, but to claim it. On the mantel where my father's photo used to stand, I placed the old house key instead, framed, the one they forgot I held all along. And sometimes when I pass by it, I don't feel rage, I just feel peace. Earned, quiet, mine. Let me ask you something, honestly, just between us. If the people you fed with your own hands turned and starved you, would you have still set the table? If someone rewrote your story, erased your name from the credits after you built the stage, would you have torn the whole thing down, or walked away in silence? Would you have stayed quiet, waited, gathered proof instead of pity? Would you have fought back, or let them have it all just to keep the peace that never really belonged to you? Because that's what this is about, isn't it? It's not revenge, it's memory. It's the cost of being overlooked one too many times. So I'm asking you, if it had been you sitting at that table, hearing the word burden from someone you once protected, what would you have done? Comment below. Because maybe someone else needs to read what you would have done before they decide what they need to do.